Hey everybody, Andy from Tennis Euphoria, bringing you my review of the Babolat Pure Drive 98 2023. Now bear with me, there's method to my madness, but I'm going to talk a little bit about the Babolat line of rackets because I think that's important when we consider the 98 Pure Drive. So you have the Aero, spin orientated rackets, think Rafa. You have the Pure Strike line, attacking power with control, think Dominic Thiem. Then you have the Pure Drive, unapologetic, unashamed power. Let's think Fognini with a slightly abbreviated swing, still loads of power, benefits from it. Then you have the VS lines, which are now the 98s. In the Aero's case, a different string pattern, 98 square inch head. With the Strike, you have again 16x20 string pattern, different mold, different racket. Then you have the Pure Drive 98, which we're looking at today, which has the smaller head. Still has the 16x19 string pattern, and they're sold in match pairs in the main. So the first thing to look at is, was mine matched? And I'm happy to report that they were perfectly matched. Although, slightly disappointingly, mine was 2.6 grams under the target static weight of 305 grams. And that is a shame because I think that would have made a difference. In terms of the rest of the manufacture quality, I thought it was really good. Paint was great. I particularly like the grommets. I think they would stand the test of time. And to match so well, I thought was, credit where credit is due. So this replaces the VS, which got bad reviews generally. I reviewed it quite negatively. It basically lacked stability. It was underweight. And I didn't really get where it was trying to position itself within the market. I thought there were better options for 98 square inch rackets that offered power with some control. So looking at this update, how does it play? First thing, a positive, I think Babolat have looked to directly address that lack of weight and stability issue. There's more weight in this when you compare the specs, balance point is adjusted, and overall I think you will get a slightly more stable experience. Now of course mine was 2.6 grams, both of mine underweight, and that 2.6 grams might sound small, but particularly at the top of the hoop or at 3 and 9, that would have made quite a difference. So I would still want to improve the stability on these and customize if I was to use them. So I would definitely look to make sure you try and get something on spec. I suspect on spec it will play more stable. So I guess a thumbs up there. With regards to wider playability, then this is something that I found myself doing, and I find myself doing this with any power racket. I tend to abbreviate my swing because I find it relatively difficult to control rackets like this. So that did lead me to appreciate if you are someone who has a relatively short swing, particularly on take back, then actually this can really help you maintain good depth in your shots. And is it more controllable or directionally accurate compared to the 100? Then possibly. So maybe we'll give that a positive too. In terms of comfort, then I had it strung up with RPM Blast in one and Luxlon Adrenaline in the other. And I'm happy to report I didn't get any harshness in my arm, elbow, wrist with either racket. I felt that it played much better with the RPM Blast. I think that string that really grabs a ball really complemented the racket really well. So I definitely, if your arm can take it and you're not worried about that, would have a look at RPM Blast in this racket. And generally you do have a stiff racket that doesn't transfer vibration. I think their technology in that area is working well. However, so you've got relative good comfort. I certainly wouldn't be worried about my arm playing with this despite some of the on-spec specs. However, if you are someone who enjoys dwell time on the ball, a ball that sinks into the string bed, for me that translates to power and intuitive kind of sense as to what's happening with the ball and where it's landing on the racket. If you're the same, then you probably aren't going to enjoy the feel of this next to other rackets that can offer you some power, which would be, I guess, the Head Extreme Tour. Even the Dunlop FX 500 Tour that I just recently reviewed has a sort of lower RA, more dwell time, a slightly more plush feel. So that's one thing to keep in mind. My big challenge with this racket, I don't want to call it an issue necessarily, is that the string pattern is actually quite dense in the middle. and I found then that it was relatively difficult for me to play effectively with. So if I was to hit out with full swing and try and hit the ball hard, the ball would sail on me a little. So the trajectory is very much a sort of rocket that just goes off without too much of an arc. And also the racket, I don't think in its purest form generates that much spin, particularly compared to others with similar specs, and that's an issue for me. I don't have massive spin mechanics, but I appreciate a racket that lifts the ball off quickly, grommets that really move, and that will help me to get good angles, and I can ultimately control the ball with great depth and arc, something that I like that isn't present in this racket. So I could also find that if I was trying to hit angles or play cutely, I'd hit the net a fair bit with this racket. So again, I think you've really got to consider your style when you're looking at this racket, and if you're someone who likes a higher launch angle, a little bit of an arc and lots of spin, then again you're going to look elsewhere. So again, I think this comes back down to that market positioning. I kind of understand the Aero VS. If you've someone who's got loads and loads of spin but need a little bit more precision, your game's really developing, the Aero VS really makes a lot of sense. And Holger Rune, Alcaraz, they're kind of great examples of having, you know, powerful games loaded with spin where they can really benefit from that. I also actually really do get the Pure Strike VS. It is ultimately quite a different offering to the Pure Strike. It's a different mold, has a different sweet spot. It's still relatively powerful, but it is a more controlled setup than the Pure Strike. With this one, I still just don't get its market positioning, unfortunately. So if I was advising someone who came to me and I had to look at their technique, I wouldn't necessarily advise them to look at this racket over the standard Pure Drive. I also wouldn't advise them to look at this racket over the Wilson Ultra 100, for example. If you've got rackets that are playing towards power and easy depth and something that's going to help you out, then why stifle that? And I think that all that this is really doing is stifling some of its natural characteristics rather than adding something to it. If you are looking for something with a bit more controllable attacking power, then look at the Pure Strike. So I think it still struggles to find its place in the market, even though it is an improvement on the previous if you're careful to buy one on spec. And of course, the eZone 98. This is squarely now looking at that racket with these specs, and it just lacks that sweet spot, feel, and some spin generation, which I actually think is important and is present in the eZone 98. So that would be my summary. I think it is an improvement. They've listened, but I still just don't get really the line, and it isn't necessarily something that I'd recommend. If you are looking for an update to the previous, go for it. It's an improvement, and it might be something that you want to look at if you like a comfortable but ultimately quite harsh response and really want to look at a 98 square inch. Hope that was helpful. Please like the video, that would really help me out. Aero VS next, so subscribe to watch that one. See you soon.